Archaeologists found a man who should have died within weeks. He lived for decades. The impossible part? He lived roughly 50,000 years before hospitals existed. If you broke a bone tomorrow, you'd expect a hospital, a cast, painkillers, maybe a few weeks on crutches before you walked normally again. Most of us never question that. We assume caring for people who can't care for themselves is something civilization invented. Cities came first.
Medicine came second.
At least that's the story most of us grew up believing.
But 3 archaeological discoveries found on 3 different continents tell a very different story. And by the end of this video, you may never think about early humans the same way again. Let's start with the first skeleton. In 1957, archaeologists uncovered human remains inside Shanidar Cave in what is now Iraqi Kurdistan. At first glance, it looked like another Neanderthal burial.
Then they started studying the bones. The man had lost his right forearm. He had suffered a crushing injury to his skull that likely blinded one eye. His leg bones showed he walked with a severe limp. His spine had deteriorated enough that almost every movement would have been painful. Then researchers made one final discovery. He was likely almost completely deaf. Think about that for a second. Imagine trying to survive in the Ice Age with one arm, limited vision, constant pain, and barely able to hear a predator approaching. Even one of those injuries could be a death sentence. He had all of them. Yet dental evidence suggests he lived to somewhere between 40 and 50 years old, an advanced age for a Neanderthal. How? There's only one explanation that fits the evidence. For years, possibly decades, other members of his group kept him alive. Someone shared food with him. Someone waited for him when he couldn't keep up. Someone protected him when he couldn't protect himself. Recent researchers have debated exactly how dependent he was. Some argue earlier interpretations may have underestimated what he could still do despite his injuries. That's an important discussion. But it doesn't change the central mystery. The injuries are real. The survival is real. However independent he remained, he lived far longer than anyone would expect after suffering that much physical trauma. And Shanidar wasn't the only impossible case. Thousands of miles away, archaeologists uncovered another skeleton. This one raises an even harder question. The individual had been paralyzed since early adolescence, not injured as an adult, paralyzed as a teenager. Researchers concluded he had almost no functional use of his lower body and very limited movement in his upper body. Now imagine everyday life without modern medicine. You can't prepare food. You can't gather water. You can't move yourself. You can't even roll over while sleeping. Without someone turning your body, pressure sores can develop into life-threatening infections. Yet this individual didn't survive for days or months. He survived for years into adulthood. That means somebody fed him every single day. Somebody cleaned him, somebody carried him, somebody turned his body through the night again and again for years. None of that helped the group hunt. None of it made better tools. None of it increased the next day's food supply. They did it anyway. If the first skeleton suggested compassion wasn't an accident, this one suggests it had already become part of everyday life. And somehow, the third discovery is even more astonishing. This time, the location was different. Borneo, a cave called Liang Tibo on the Indonesian side of the island. In 2020, archaeologists found a skeleton, missing the lower third of one leg. At first, they assumed an animal had taken it. Then, they looked closer. The cut wasn't jagged. It wasn't torn. It was clean, deliberate. The kind of healed bone pattern doctors recognize today from amputations that never got infected. 3 separate dating methods confirmed the age. 31,000 years old. Before this discovery, the oldest known amputation on record belonged to a farmer in France, roughly 7,000 years old. Borneo broke that record by 24,000 years. How does a child survive that? In the Ice Age, in a rainforest where an open wound can turn fatal within days. Somebody amputated that leg with enough knowledge of human anatomy to stop the bleeding before it killed him. Somebody treated the wound afterward with enough knowledge of local plants to fight off infection in one of the most bacteria-dense environments on Earth.
And the child didn't die. Not within days, not within weeks. He lived another 6 to 9 years. 24,000 years before farming, before writing, before anything we'd call civilization. Now line up all 3 discoveries. 3 continents, 3 completely different injuries, 3 different time periods separated by tens of thousands of years.
And in every single case, the answer was the same. Keep this person alive, no matter the cost. We grew up on one story about prehistory. Survival of the fittest. The strong endure. The weak get left behind. Only the useful get fed. The skeletons tell a different story. Long before agriculture, long before cities, long before anything we call civilization, humans were already spending years feeding someone, carrying someone, protecting someone who could give absolutely nothing back. Not because it made sense on paper, because somewhere in our past, it had already stopped being a choice. And that raises a harder question than where any of this started. If keeping the weakest alive came before writing, before farming, before almost everything we think makes us civilized, then maybe compassion isn't something civilization built. Maybe civilization is something compassion built.